We're going to be working through our sermon series we've been in for the last number of weeks on Father Abraham. In fact, today and next Sunday are our final two sermons in this sermon series, so we're going to be wrapping it up. Just a quick announcement that you need to know about. These last couple weeks have been wild around Redemption Gilbert. One of the things that is true when summer hits, we actually crank it up into the summer. So we had youth camp 2 weeks ago out in San Diego at Point Loma, which was amazing. If you were there, I'm sure you had a great time. Then last week we had kids camp for our elementary kids here in this room. In fact, there's still some fluffy stuff here on the stage that I think was from a craft of some sort. That's just the way it is around here in the summer. And so now if you're a family, I don't want you to miss out on one more opportunity. And now I do have to warn you, I told this to the last service and they might have taken the spots, but there is one more family thing for you, and it's this Friday. We're hosting a morning at the movies. So we rented out a movie theater at the Santan Harkins, and then we're going to have the new Pixar movie, Elio, does that sound right? Elio? You can tell how engaged I am and what the name of that movie is. My family loves Pixar movies, and we thought, hey, this would be a great opportunity to just get people together and hang out. So we have a theater that will seat 110 people. And this morning at 6:30 a.m. when I left, I was told that we already had 80 of the 110 tickets sold, and it's this Friday. So if you go, man, I really would like to take my kids, you probably should be doing it right now on the app or on the website. It starts at 11 o'clock Friday morning. We have the theater starting at 10:15, and we told them we don't want none of those trailers and commercials before our movie. So it's starting right at 11, so you need to be there, ready to go. Nothing says family fun like starting on time. That's how we do it around here. So we'll be at the movies on Friday morning. I'll be there. I'd love to see you if you want to come hang out with us and see a movie you might see anyway. And we're going to continue with Father Abraham. Now, I know not everyone was here last week. Summer that's the time of year that we're in, and that means there's a lot of people traveling, and you're in and you're out. If you weren't here last week, you really missed out on some fun. This week, I was thinking about where we're going, because we're really heading towards the climax of Abraham's story. In particular, next week, we're going to hit this crescendo moment of faith in which God really defines what he wants from Abraham ultimately. And this week is another one of those kind of build-up moments, but it really does have a payoff for a moment that's been going on for a long time. And as I was thinking about it, and what does it make me think of, I was talking to my son Asher, who's getting ready to be a senior, and we were talking about movies, and he mentioned one of his favorite movies is the movie Interstellar. And as a nerd, I was like, that's right, I've done something right in raising this boy. If you've never seen Interstellar, it's long, it's kind of confusing, it's sci-fi, there's time jumps and quantum vacuum. There's a bunch of nerdy stuff in it, and it's great. And I was thinking about him saying that because in particular, there's a scene in the movie, and if you've never seen it, there's a moment where the crew who's on a spaceship needs to go down to the surface of a planet with a giant amount of gravity. And if you know anything about Einstein's theory of relativity, that the gravity well that this planet creates actually dilates time itself. So the team that goes down to the surface of the planet only experiences a few hours in their life pass. But on the ship that was left behind, some 23 years pass in those few hours that they're down on the surface. And there's a moment in which they come back to the ship, and they dock with the ship, and the ship doors open, and you see the one crew member that they left behind, and he's feeble, and he seems like he's a little unstable, and because he's wearing a bathrobe. That's how you know things haven't been going well for him. And he says, through a shaky voice, I've waited for years. That moment has always haunted me because it's hard for me to imagine what that must have been like when they leave and they say, don't worry, we're coming back. And 23 years goes by before he has any evidence that they're going to follow through on the promise. And I thought, oh man, that's exactly what's happening today in Genesis. Last week we were working through Genesis chapter 19, which was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a lot. If you were here, way to go. You survived that sermon. If you missed it and you wonder what it was all about, you can go catch up online. But I think it would be fair to summarize what we experienced in Genesis chapter 19 and in chapter 20 that I sent you home to read together is failure and darkness. We saw how the destruction of Sodom came because they were an unrighteous, unhospitable people. We saw how Lot had become embroiled in their way of life, and he tried to protect these visitors and his family. We saw how they were run out of town before the city was destroyed. We saw how they ended up with his wife turning to a pillar of salt. We saw how they ended up in a cave, and some very uncomfortable things happened with his family in that place. And then if you read chapter 20 this week, you saw how, man, if we were hoping to get back to our heroes, Abraham and Sarah, what we actually find when we show up with them is they're making the same mistakes. Once again, Abraham is farming his wife off to a king and saying it's his sister. In fact, you might have thought you were reading a chapter you had already read, but no, it's happening again. There's this darkness and this worry about how is this all going to work out if the heroes of our story are this bad at living out the story itself. There's a quote from Victor Hugo in Les Mis where he says, even the darkest night will end and the sun will rise. And if you're reading through chapters 19 and 20, it feels like a dark night. But today, that night ends in Genesis chapter 1. If you're following along, last week I said close your Bible. I was just going to read it to you. Today, open it up. We're going to start in verse 1. We're going to work through this whole chapter. And verse 1 really summarizes the dawn. This is that moment where the sun is rising out of the darkness, and this is what it says. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. This is the story that the Bible is telling. God is a faithful God. He's a righteous God. He follows through on his promises. In fact, the way we said it last week was God keeps doing what he said he would do. We have some 25 years of Abraham and Sarah waiting. And if you remember, when God made the promise that he would give them an heir and build a great nation through them, they were incredulous about that promise because they were so old. And then a decade passes, and another decade passes, and most of another decade passes, and it still hasn't come to fruition. I can't imagine what that was doing in their hearts on those dark nights where things seemed to be going wrong and comets were flying out of the sky and destroying evil in the world. Is God going to come through? I've waited so long. He does come through. This is what the text tells us happened. Sarah became pregnant, and she bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time that God had promised him. Remember, it's been twice in the last couple chapters where God and messengers from God have come and said, I'm going to give you a baby next year at this time, and it happens. Sarah's pregnant, they have the child, and Abraham gave him the name Isaac, which was given to him in chapter 18 from the Lord himself, who said, because Sarah laughed, you're going to call your son Laughter. That's what Isaac means. That's the translation of his name. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. That has also been part of the arrangement that God has made. I will keep my promise, and what I want from you is your faith and your belief, and part of the way you're going to demonstrate that faith and belief is through circumcision. And he does that. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. He was real old. Now Abraham does live to be 180, but by any measure, 100 is pretty old. And here he is having a brand new baby. It just makes me think of this text I was reading this week out of Lamentations. You know how we read Lamentations all the time. You probably, wait, is that a book in the Bible? Yes, it is. This is what Lamentations says. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait on him. I don't know what it is you're waiting for in your life. We all sit in a situation in our faith journey and in the way we exist in our families and in our life, whether you're young or you're old or you're just plain old boring middle-aged like me. You're waiting on something. And in that patience is a temptation to begin to manipulate the story to bring about the ends that you want. And this text reminds us, and the story of Abraham reminds us, wait on the Lord because he's going to do what he said he's going to do. That's who our God is. The other thing I think we learn from this story that follows as a theme throughout the entirety of Scripture is this: God tends to do the surprising on behalf of the unlikely. My family's been on a watch through of The Chosen. We lost the thread somewhere along the way, and we wanted to pick it back up and start watching it again. And there's a few things that have stood out to me. Number one, I'm still shocked at how good it is. I'm just trained that if Christian entertainment produces something, it's probably not very good. It's like medicine. I know I'm supposed to take it, but it kind of tastes bad when I do. And The Chosen is kind of great. It's really good. And in the few episodes we've been watching over the last few days, there's this thing that continues to happen over and over again where Jesus' origin from the town of Nazareth comes up and everyone is just like, you got to be kidding. What could come from this little dirt hill town? Nothing. That's perfectly on theme for our God. Here he is doing the surprising thing with the least likely people. And if you thought it was unlikely that they would have children at 65 and 75 when God made the promise, how much more unlikely is it that these people at 100 years old would give birth to a child? David, the psalm writer, he says this about this idea and tries to encapsulate it. He says, he has brought down rulers from their thrones, but he's lifted up the humble. He's filled the hungry with good things, but he's sent the rich away empty. This is the story of our God. He's doing surprising things with unlikely people all the time. And sometimes his patience, or the patience that we need to demonstrate in him following through, is to bring about an even more surprising outcome. The text continues and says this: Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And then she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? And yet here I am, I've borne him a son at my old age. I love this idea. Sarah says, God has given me laughter, literally joy, but also my son that I'm calling laughter. Here he is. And when I tell people this story, they're going to laugh, not at me. They're going to laugh with me because of the joy that God has shown me. One of the things I think that we need to take away from this is something that I deal with in my life. I would assume that maybe you do too. In my Christian sphere, we're in it right now. This is about as in it as I can get, I think, actually. It's just a natural way to talk about faith and about God's faithfulness and what God's done in my life and to think about illustrations of God's faithfulness and to talk about it. And then the minute I'm outside of the Christian sphere and I'm with regular old people out there, I start getting locked up about how to talk about my faith, about what God's doing. And I love what Sarah says here. Everyone I tell will laugh with me. There's two things that we assume. Number one, she's going to tell an amazing story of God's surprising faithfulness to an unlikely person like her, and it will bring joy to the situation, and people will laugh alongside her. I think we need to be better at this. Figuring out how do we encapsulate the stories. I'm calling them the that's crazy stories. Like when somebody tells you this story of something that happened in their life, and you're just like, that's crazy. We all have them. In particular, if you go, I don't know what my that's crazy story is. If you're a follower of Jesus, here's your that's crazy story. Once I was dead and blind and I didn't know where I was or where I was going, and God came and found me and woke me up. That's crazy. You should be really ready to tell those that's crazy stories. Be on the lookout for God's interacting in your life in a surprising way, and tell people. You might sound a little crazy. That's okay. Because the joy of God's faithfulness is worth bragging about, and that's what we see with Sarah. And then it tells us, and here's what happens. The child grew up, and he was weaned, and on the day that Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. Okay, here's where some of the cultural oddities we just have to wrestle with. There's a few things. First of all, you might be saying, what does it mean that he was weaned? Because that's not a word we typically use a lot unless you've been on the farm. Then you probably know what it looks like. right? We know, generally speaking, when babies are born, mothers will nurse their babies, but it's all very kind of private in our culture, and we don't talk much about it. And we also know, probably, that at some point along the way, those babies stop nursing with their mothers. But when it happens, I don't know how many of you have had a weaning party. Maybe you do, and I just don't know that part of the subculture. But in Abraham's day, they did. Like they say, on the day that he was weaned, he stopped nursing with his mother, we hosted a huge party about it. Now, we don't know exactly when this happens. Here's what we know. Isaac was born, 8 days later he was circumcised, and then he was weaned at some point and they had a big party. We do have some historical documents from the surrounding cultures around Abraham that this probably happened at about 3 years of age. And they would have had a big party for this moment. You might say, why is this a celebratory moment? And I think it's a really pragmatic and practical issue. And here's what it is. As many as 50% of all infants born in the Bronze Age did not survive to see their first birthday. Birth rates were through the roof at this time in history. Like, women were often pregnant from essentially early teenage years until they were no longer able to be pregnant. And part of the reason that you had to do that is because at least half of those children wouldn't survive infancy. It was a very dangerous time to give birth and to raise children. And if you've ever had kids as an older couple, you get to define what that looks like. We had kids as what I would call an older couple. And part of what comes with that package is an OB saying to you and your spouse, hey, you just need to know there are increased risks for a bunch of health issues when you have children at an older age. This is part of the package. It's part of the deal. Now imagine you're 100 and you show up at the OB and it's like, well, okay, this is miraculous, but you need to be warned. There's some potential issues that are going to happen here. Like you might turn into a cloud of dust in the middle of this thing. I don't know. And then the baby is born into a very dangerous world in which disease and starvation, this stuff could come all the time. And now Isaac, the one that we have long hoped for, has been born, miracle of miracles, and he's been weaned, which means he survived the gauntlet of potential death. And they throw a huge party. And at the party, something happens. Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham was mocking. Now, we just got to pause here. If you've been with us through the whole story so far, you know what we're talking about. If today's your first Sunday with us, welcome. We're in the middle of a big story here. There's a moment in the story, a number of chapters ago in the Bible, in which Abraham and Sarah, although they've been promised an heir to carry on their name and to inherit the land, didn't think that God was going to deliver. And so therefore, they took a slave woman from Egypt named Hagar, and they had Abraham have a child with her. His name is Ishmael. And now that God has delivered for Sarah and Abraham to have Isaac, we're having the party, and there's an issue at the party. And here's what the issue is. Sarah sees that Ishmael is mocking. Now, this is a tricky translation issue because the word we use for mocking is actually the same word for laughing. So there is a way we could read this that says, Sarah saw that the son, Ishmael, was laughing. Now there is a verb switch in there that's slight, which changes the meaning from laughing with me, ha ha ha, to laughing at me. In fact, it's mentioned in Galatians, we don't have time to go there, that there was a mocking that was going on. It was believed that what Ishmael was doing was mocking. And so Sarah comes to Abraham and she says, this is a big problem. You got to take that woman and her son and you got to get them out of here. They're not going to share in the inheritance that Now to remember, this was Sarah's idea from the beginning. And now she's worried because she sees at the party that this is going on. Now, there's two things that could be happening here, and we don't really know. One of them is Ishmael could be making fun of Isaac, the baby. He could be making fun of his old parents. Or he could just be getting a bunch of attention and a bunch of yucks over in the corner when the attention is supposed to be over here on Isaac. We don't really know. Mark Twain has a great quote in which he says this: the human race really has only one effective weapon: laughter. When things are hard and they're dark, what do? We get together and we laugh together to push back the darkness. And when we really want to cut someone, what do? We point at them and we make fun of you as a weapon. And what she's perceiving is that Ishmael is not laughing with her like everyone else. He's laughing at them. And she isn't going to have any part of it. And I think mostly it's because of this fact, which is one of the commentaries says this. It's as if Ishmael is pretending to be Isaac, the boy whose name links him to laughter. It's as if he's threatening to take the place that belongs to Isaac. Just remember with me for a second here. Ishmael, when we last had heard some conversation about him, was 13 years old. And it was at that point that God said, no, in a year from now, I'm going to give you a baby. So now he's 14 years and the baby's born. And now it's been 3 years, we're going to assume, since he's weaned. So now he's 17 years old. He's probably a handsome, charming young man who's gathering attention, and Sarah sees this threat. And what we see is something we do all the time. We protect that which we fear we could lose. She immediately begins moving to protect Isaac. And I think what she reveals to us is a core lack of belief. And here's what I think that lack of belief is. The lack of belief is that God is the one that has delivered, that God is the one that will bring the inheritance that she wants. Instead, she's going right back to, I need to protect this inheritance. I need to build a structure around this. I need to make sure that nobody screws up what we now have in a good thing with our boy. And so she kicks him out. And this is the truth of that. When we move to protect things that we think we could lose, we often hurt people around us. And that's exactly what Sarah does. This poor woman, Hagar, just as a side for a second, she's taken away from her home in Egypt, brought as a slave to these people. They concoct this abuse situation in which they impregnate her in order to bring about an heir. They kick them out of the house, they bring them back in, and now they're kicking them out again. This poor lady's been through a lot. And as you would expect, this matter distressed Abraham greatly. Just remember for a second now, Abraham's an old man who's never had a boy of his own. And they come up with this plan with Hagar to have a son, and she does. And he, apparently, what we can see from the text is that Abraham loves him and treats him as if this is my first and only heir, and everything's going to go to him. He adores this boy. And now he's seeing the equation of what's really going on. He's going to be forced to send him out into the world. And immediately God arrives and says, let me talk to you about this. Don't be distressed about the boy and the slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also because he's your offspring. Listen, I already made a promise. Your offspring will be made into nations. We saw it last week in this crazy stuff that happened in a cave with Lot and his daughters. And at the end of it, he says, and look what happened. He made that nation over there, and he made that nation over there. And now if you're worried about what's going to happen to Ishmael, don't worry about it. Isaac's the one you need to be concerned about. I'll worry about Ishmael. I already made a promise to him. And Abraham is entrusted with the very thing that so many of us have to deal with. Are we going to trust God with our kids' future? My son Asher already said he's going into his senior year. I think this is landing with me right now more than it ever has before. In fact, this week I was thinking about my story. I'm the oldest and the best of my siblings. And when I was 22 years old, I married this lovely young lady, Rachel, from my hometown. And we loaded up a U-Haul with all my stuff and all her stuff. And it was a very small U-Haul. And then I turned to my parents, who are here today in the room, and I said, all right, I'll see you later. And I got in that U-Haul and drove across the entire continent, never to return. I mean, that had to have been hard. You can ask them. I mean, can you imagine losing a son like this? And I just never considered it from their perspective. It was just like I was going on an adventure, and now here Abraham is faced with the real heavy reality of, will I trust God to let this kid walk out of my story and let God be the one to carry him? And Abraham does. This is what he says. The next morning, Abraham gets some food and a skin of water, and he takes him to Hagar, and he puts it on her shoulders, And then he said, all right, you guys got to get out of here. And he sends them out into the desert. And she went on her way, and she wandered in the desert of Beersheba. She wandered in the middle of nowhere. Now, once again, I want you to be with Moses telling this story to the Israelites around the campfire. When he says they went to wander the desert, I'm imagining him doing this, because they look up and go, oh yeah, this is a desolate place out here. That's not going to be good for them. And it tells us it's not, because the water runs out, and she puts this is kind of an awkward situation, because we just acknowledged that Ishmael's 17. It kind of sounds like he's an infant, because it says, she took the boy and she put him under this bush. He's starving. He's probably on the verge of dying of dehydration. They have nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. They're probably lost in the desert. And so she puts him under this shady bush and says, rest here, son. And then I'm picturing him falling asleep, and she wanders away. And so she couldn't leave him to die alone, so she goes about a bow shot away. Everybody's most standard measurement, 150 yards. I don't know what your bow shot is, but she goes far enough away that she doesn't have to watch him die, but also she can't leave her boy. And she begins to sob about the situation. She's crying, weeping there. This is a reality for all of us. They're in a very specific, real wilderness. But the wilderness in all of our lives is the place where you finally run out of your resources. Whatever you brought to the party, whatever you thought was the thing that was going to deliver you, whatever you had on your shoulder, I have enough food and enough water, I can make this work. And in the wilderness is where you have to come face to face that whatever you brought, whatever you thought was going to get you through, you've come to the end of it. That's where Hagar is, and she's sitting there wondering what she's going to do. And out of that moment, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God said to Hagar from heaven, what is the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying. He's lying there. Lift him up and take him by the hand, for I'm going to make him into a great nation. God says, what are you crying about? I've proven myself over and over and over again, and I'm going to do it again. It's going to be all right. I'm going to come through. Now, here's part of the thing that we have to wrestle with. We hear the phrase that he's going to turn him into a great nation, and we make the word great a value proposition. We use the word great, and we say good. Or we hear the word great, and we hear exceptional. Or we hear good, and we hear righteous. Now remember what God says when he talks to Abraham. He says, go look at the sand in the desert right there. How many grains of sand are there? Just like the grains of sand will be your descendants, a great many. Now nobody looks at the sand and goes, boy, that is some great sand. It's really good quality sand. No, we understand it's very much sand, right? The problem is his next illustration is the stars. And that's where we get a little confused, because he goes, I'm going to make you great like the stars. And we go, well, yeah, there's a lot of them, but they're great. They're amazing. They're wonderful. We just have to anchor ourselves to understand what he's saying. The promise is, I will make you numerous. And look, through Lot and his daughters, he made those people. There's a bunch of them. And through this daughter, all those people, there's a bunch of them. And in Ishmael, I'm going to make him a great nation too. Don't worry about it. And this is the thing I think we need to take away from it. If you're a Christian, if you've been following God for a while in your life, I think one of the things that is just totally obvious is what we want is for God to show up and to speak with us and to move in our lives when we've still got all the stuff that we want. When things are going good, when things are easy, when things are going with the flow. That's when I want God to show up. The problem is, in my experience, and yours might be different, but my experience, that's almost never when he shows up. He shows up when I'm in the wilderness and all my stuff is gone, and I realize I'm lost unless he shows up. And if you're a Christian, isn't that your story? It was when you finally realized you didn't have anything to bring to the party that he said, and therefore I'm here to give you what you need. And that's exactly what happens here. It's in the wilderness where we run into God's provision. So God opens her eyes, and she sees a well of water, and she went and she filled her water skin and she gave it to the boy. I love it. Here's the resolution of their story. She looks up and she realizes, can you imagine how this feels? That right within her eye shot, there's a well. that she could have gotten water from. And so she goes and gets water. She gives it to the boy. And then it summarizes Ishmael's story. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert. He became an archer. And while he was living in the desert, his mom went down to Egypt, found himself a wife. Everything's cool with Ishmael. Wrapping up that story. Bow. Now here's the thing. This is the moment where Ishmael walks out of our story, but he walks into another story. If you were here with us in the very first week of this series, one of the things we talked about is why the story of Abraham is so important to so many people. In fact, what we said was over 50% of the people on earth tie their origin to this story. We talked about it. Some 20 million Jews, of course, tie their history to Abraham. Some 2.5 billion people who say that they're Christians on earth tie their story to Abraham through this. And the unaccounted other portion is the 2 billion Muslims on the planet who tie their origin story here to Ishmael. In fact, my friend Josh asked me a couple weeks ago, hey, didn't Ishmael have something to do with Islam and all that? And well, here's where he walks into their story. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad, their prophet, is a descendant of Ishmael. He wasn't born until like the 6th or 7th century after Jesus, but they would say if you trace back his lineage, it goes back to Ishmael and part of Abraham's promise. And even more interesting is this is a picture right here of the Kaaba, which is, if you ever heard about Mecca and how people who follow Islam will pray multiple times a day and they have to face Mecca, it's because of the Kaaba, which sits in the middle. Maybe you've seen it on the news every year where there's a pilgrimage and they're walking in circles praying around it. They believe in Islam that Abraham and Ishmael actually went on a trip to Mecca and built this thing, the original version of it. He walks right into a whole nother story in which a massive part of human population says, oh no, this is part of our story too. But we're back with Moses and we're in our story. We're going to just stop here just for a second as we wrap up, because if you're looking at your text, you actually see there's kind of a big chunk still left. And this is one of those moments where you go, why is this part of the story here? I mean, Abraham and Sarah have now had their baby Isaac. We've now cleared up the problem of the other heir, Ishmael. He's out of the story. Aren't we ready to just move on? And then we have this weird aside with treaties and wells. What is going on? I want you just to think with me for a second that you're around the campfire with Moses, hearing these stories. Where are we? How did we get here? Who are our ancestors? And this story, I think, is as simple as this. They're sitting around a well, drinking water in the desert, and he's like, let me tell you about this well. And how's this side we get? I'm going to run through it quickly. Here's what he says. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the forces, said to Abraham, so Abimelech's a king of this region Abraham's in, and his soldier come to him and they say, hey, God's with you in everything you do. Now swear to me before your God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. I might be in charge today, but I understand who you are and who your God is. And so I get that at some point you're going to be on the top of this pile and I'm going to be at the bottom. Can we make an arrangement that you're going to treat me fairly? Are we good with that? And he says, yes, I swear it, Abraham says. Now, if you're the people listening around the campfire, I think that anchors you as to the way you should treat the people who are in the land where you are right now. Hey, remember our ancestor Abraham made a deal with these people and their king that we would treat them fairly. We good? Moving on. He says, then Abraham has a complaint for Abimelech. And the complaint is that the well of water that's here, Abimelech's servants have come and they've commandeered the well and they've told Abraham and his people they can't drink from this. And Abimelech says, listen, I didn't know anything about this. I don't know who did this. You didn't tell me. This is the first time hearing of it. So they work out a deal. Abraham brings some sheep and cattle and he gives them to Abimelech, and the two men make a treaty in that place. Why is this significant? Not necessarily because I think the treaty really is that big a deal in the story. I honestly think this is Moses telling the people as we're sitting around this well. Where'd this well come from? Is it cool that we're drinking this water? Is somebody going to be mad that we're here and this is their well? No. This is Abraham's well. In fact, he made a deal on this well way back when. He gave him he set aside 7 ewe lambs to give it to him. That's the witness that I'm the one that dug this well, and I have a claim to this well. And when we call this place Beersheba Sheba because the two men swore an oath there. And after the treaty, they worked out a deal, and Abraham stayed here in this place for a long time. And that's how the chapter wraps up. What are we supposed to do? We're not with Moses. We're not in the desert trying to make sense of how we can drink from this well legally. We're not asking questions about how do we treat the people who are living here because we made a treaty with their king generations ago. What are we supposed to take away from this? I think it's as simple as this. We need to understand that our God was here laying the foundation for this mission long before us. And it's true of Moses and the Israelites coming out of slavery, and it's true of you and me in this place right now. And in particular, as Western culture, individualistic Americans, we're really bad at acknowledging our ancestors, our past, and the chain of lineage that brought us to this place. We really want to be dealt with as individuals. We're here right now on this Sunday talking about where we are. Are we faithful or are we not? And we should be asking that question. You should be asking, am I faithful? Am I believing God the way he wants me to? But the reality is, what we have been invited into as the people of God, the faithfulness, the story that God has been building, he started building way before we were ever here, before anything was on this piece of property. Generations upon generations upon generations in the past, God has been doing the work, laying the foundation that we are now benefiting from. In fact, the scripture says that before the foundations of the world, God was working this plan. There's two things that has to leave us with. The first one is an immense appreciation for the fact that he has included us in that incredible plan. And the second one is an understanding this ain't our story, it's his, and he's just shown fit to bring us along for the ride. And I'm so thankful for that. That's what we need to remember. God's been doing work. God's done miracles in your life. He's rescued you from darkness and let the sun rise on your face. What a gift that is. Let's pray that God would help us to be faithful people. God, thank you so much for this time together. Thank you for the story of Abraham. Thank you for helping us to understand what's going on here. God, I pray that we would be faithful. I pray that we could be a people who understand that you've been on mission for long before us. And I pray that you'd help us to be faithful in the time that you've called us to right here. God, help us to be the kind of people who patiently wait on you to deliver because you always do. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.